Eliza Gray was having a pretty average Tuesday. Or, at least, she had been until she stepped into a cafe on the corner of 5th and 28th, a place she passed every day on her way to work. The barista had the same bored expression as always, and the usual hum of conversation buzzed softly in the background. She ordered her usual, black coffee, no sugar, no cream, then wandered to the farthest corner of the cafe, where she always Saturday. There was nothing unusual about this morning, not at first, and then, there was the woman. She was standing near the door, almost too still for someone in a place so casually hectic. Dark hair in a slick bun, sharp business suit with a silver pin at her collar. Eliza had always found the idea of pins on clothing to be a bit too corporate spy for her taste. It was the sort of thing you'd see in a James Bond movie, but she was in a coffee shop in New York, not chasing down international criminals in Monaco. So, she tried to ignore her, which was the sensible thing to do. But the woman was staring at her. And not in that subtle, "Oh, I think I know you" way, but in the "I'm going to make you regret not saying something" way. Eliza blinked and looked away, fiddling with her phone as she tried to play it cool. It didn't work. After a long moment of quiet tension, the woman spoke. "You've been chosen," she said. Eliza froze, her fingers stilling on her phone screen. She wasn't sure if the woman was speaking to her or if this was some elaborate joke, but when she glanced up, the woman was still staring at her with the same unblinking intensity. "Excuse me?" Eliza said, an awkward chuckle escaping her mouth. I don't know what you." The woman stepped forward. There was no introduction, no pleasantries. Just a small, black object she pressed into Eliza's hands. A sleek rectangle, too smooth to be a phone, too thin to be a wallet. The device hummed as Eliza touched it, sending a quick shiver up her spine. "This," the woman said, "is the dimensional key. You're going to need it." Eliza opened her mouth, about to protest, when the woman, who was definitely not playing around, added, "I don't have time for your questions. Just use the device when you're ready." Eliza blinked at the woman, at the device. She wasn't quite sure what was happening, but this definitely wasn't a normal Tuesday. "Okay," she said, sarcastic, trying to defuse the situation. "I'm going to just, open up a rift in space-time, hop into another dimension, and grab a coffee from Earth 67. The woman's lips twitched into the faintest smile. "You'll find out soon enough," she said. Then, in one swift motion, she turned and walked out of the cafe. For a few moments, Eliza stood frozen, clutching the small device in her hands, unsure of whether she was still in reality or if she'd stepped into some elaborate prank. But after a moment, the device buzzed again, and a soft, melodic voice whispered in her ear, "Welcome, Eliza Gray, to the Dimensional Intelligence Agency." It was safe to say Eliza's life had just taken a drastic turn. The next few hours were a blur. She was escorted by a man named Agent Ross, who had the kind of serious face Eliza only saw on those spy thrillers she secretly loved. He took her to a nondescript van and, without any explanation, handed her a pair of dark glasses. "You'll need these," he said cryptically. Eliza raised an eyebrow but put them on. The world around her suddenly shifted, like a camera zooming in too fast. When the world snapped back into focus, they were no longer on the streets of Manhattan. They were in a sleek, futuristic facility, white walls, fluorescent lights, and far too many monitors for her comfort. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice catching. "Did you just teleport me?" Agent Ross didn't blink. "We're traveling across dimensions. Welcome to DIA headquarters." She didn't know what to say. Eliza was a software engineer, not a dimensional traveler. She worked on apps that tracked your coffee consumption and made it easier to order from local grocery stores. Now, she was standing in a high-tech building full of people who were watching her as if she were the guest of honor at some very weird party. "Don't worry," Agent Ross said, as though reading her thoughts, "this is all part of the process." "Process?" Eliza managed. "That's right. The Dimensional Intelligence Agency is an elite organization responsible for gathering intelligence from parallel dimensions. You've been selected to join our ranks. Your skills in software and hacking are critical to our operations. There it was again, the word chosen. Eliza had never been good at being chosen for anything, much less something that involved hopping through alternate realities. Wait, she said, half laughing, half exasperated. You're telling me that I'm going to work for some kind of spy agency that collects tech and information from other dimensions? Agent Ross nodded. Pretty much, he said, his voice flat. Except it's not just about collecting. It's about controlling. She paused. Controlling? Agent Ross led her down a hallway lined with doors. The Dimensional Intelligence Agency is responsible for ensuring the stability of the multiverse. We collect information to protect Earth from the dangers of other dimensions, but also to safeguard our access to technologies that can help secure our place in the multiverse. Eliza's mind reeled. There were so many questions, so many things she didn't understand, but for now, she followed Ross into a sterile, high-tech room where a number of agents were working on various consoles. Here's your workspace, Ross said, gesturing to a seat at a terminal. He handed her another device, a small, palm-sized black orb. This will allow you to interface with any technology you encounter in other worlds. You'll be gathering data and infiltrating key places across the multiverse. That's your job. Simple enough. Eliza took a seat, trying to digest it all. The thought of traveling between worlds seemed impossible, yet here she was, staring at a holographic interface, surrounded by agents who were completely unfazed by the idea of alternate realities. Just one thing, she said, testing the weight of the black orb in her hand. How do I know all this isn't? I don't know, evil. Agent Ross didn't flinch. You'll get used to it. And that was the moment Eliza realized this wasn't some weird experiment or corporate gig. It was real. The next few days passed in a haze of training and more strange revelations. Eliza learned that the device she held wasn't just a key, it was a portal opener. With a few taps, she could slip into a parallel world, a place where reality had taken a different path. Some worlds were eerily similar to hers, while others were so strange that they seemed almost impossible. But the objective was always the same: gather intel. Her first mission involved a world where technology had far surpassed anything from her dimension, and the government there was less authoritarian and more totalitarian. They had long since lost any notion of democracy or freedom, instead creating a near-perfect surveillance state. As Eliza stepped through her first portal, the air crackled with the hum of strange energy. She looked around at the gleaming skyscrapers and the uniformed citizens walking in perfect synchronization. This is not New York, she thought. Eliza stepped out of the portal and into a world that felt like a futuristic nightmare. The air smelled sterile, almost metallic, and the streets shimmered with an unnerving brightness. She wasn't in New York anymore. The towering skyscrapers around her gleamed with a cold, clinical shine, their windows spotless, reflecting the gray sky above. There was no chaos here, no honking horns, no street vendors, no people talking too loudly on their phones. Just a steady stream of perfectly dressed individuals marching in synchronized lines, their faces expressionless, as though they were all part of one grand machine. The people didn't look at her as she walked past them, though she could feel their eyes on her, a faint, prickling sensation at the back of her neck. She tried to blend in, but it was hard to ignore how out of place she felt in this ultra-sterile, hyper-controlled environment. Don't stand out, Agent Ross's voice crackled through her earpiece. We don't know how much surveillance they have in place. Eliza nodded, although she knew he couldn't see her. The earpiece buzzed again with another piece of advice. Gather intel on their tech infrastructure. Stay in the shadows. Great. Shadowy tech gathering. Her specialty, right? She glanced around, taking in the impressive array of technology that adorned every corner of the city. Holographic ads floated in midair, advertising some kind of unidentifiable product that promised to improve efficiency. Across the street, a giant billboard projected an image of a smiling woman, her eyes unblinking as she held up a sleek metallic device in her hand. The words on the sign read, "Total Harmony. Join the collective." It made her stomach turn a little. The collective. The kind of dystopian utopia where free will was apparently an afterthought. She adjusted her jacket, trying to look like she belonged, and began walking in the direction of a massive glass building at the center of the city. It seemed like the heart of this world's technological infrastructure, the nerve center where all the data flowed. There was something ominous about it, something that screamed, corporate overlords, and she was pretty sure it was exactly where she needed to go. Just as she was approaching the entrance, the earpiece crackled again. "Don't get too close. We need the layout of the building, not a confrontation." Eliza rolled her eyes, irritated by the constant monitoring, but she didn't argue. Instead, she circled the building, sticking to the shadows, making sure to keep her distance. The outside of the building was sleek and modern, but there was a sense of cold efficiency to it that sent a shiver down her spine. Everything felt too perfect, like no one had ever stopped to question what was happening inside. A small alley between two skyscrapers caught her eye, and she slipped into it, scanning her surroundings. She needed to find a way to get inside, unnoticed. As she walked, she spotted a narrow maintenance door that seemed to lead into the heart of the building. There was no one around, but a faint buzzing sound hummed from the door's lock. She stopped. A security system. Typical, Eliza sighed, pulling out the small orb from her pocket, the same one that had been assigned to her by the DIA. It was supposed to help her interface with foreign tech. She pressed it to the door's keypad, watching as it scanned the lock's encryption. The orb hummed again, and after a moment, the buzzing stopped. The door clicked open. "Well, that was easy," she muttered under her breath. She slipped inside, the door clicking shut behind her with a soft thud. The hallway she entered was narrow and utilitarian, all metallic walls and bright, sterile lighting. The air smelled faintly of chemicals, and the faint hum of machinery echoed through the space. Eliza moved quietly, sticking close to the walls and listening for any sound that might suggest she wasn't alone. After a few moments, she reached an elevator. She hesitated, eyeing the security camera mounted above the door. She had no idea how sophisticated the surveillance in this world was, but she wasn't about to take any chances. Her fingers danced over the orb, and within seconds, the camera shut off. With a grin, Eliza pressed the elevator button and waited. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing an empty, clean interior. She stepped inside and pressed the button for the 40th floor, the highest floor she could get access to based on the schematics she had been given. The elevator moved smoothly, but Eliza's stomach twisted with nerves. She was getting closer to the heart of this strange, authoritarian world, and she had no idea what she was about to find. When the doors finally opened, she stepped out into an expansive, open-concept office space. The entire floor was lined with rows of sleek, glass desks, each one occupied by a person who was hunched over a holographic terminal. They didn't look up when Eliza entered. They didn't even acknowledge her presence. It was as though she wasn't there, as though she were just another cog in the machine. She scanned the room. It was all eerily clean, too clean, almost. No personal items, no clutter. Just endless rows of people working in perfect harmony, all under the watchful gaze of cameras mounted at every corner of the room. There was a heaviness in the air, a suffocating sense of control that made Eliza's skin crawl. The only thing that stood out was a large, metal door at the far end of the floor. It was guarded by two heavily armed security personnel, who stood motionless, like statues, watching over the entrance. Eliza's eyes narrowed. That was where the real data was being stored. Whatever secret this place was hiding, it was behind that door. The question was, how was she going to get past the guards? She quickly ducked behind a row of desks, blending in with the employees. They were all so absorbed in their work that they didn't notice her at all. Keeping low, she moved along the rows of terminals, her mind racing. She could try hacking the security system, but the guards would likely notice if the doors suddenly opened. She needed something more subtle, more creative. Her gaze fell on one of the employees' desks. There was a security badge lying casually on the desk, half hidden beneath a pile of paperwork. The employee was completely engrossed in his work, not paying attention to his surroundings. Perfect, Eliza slipped up behind him, swiped the badge, and quickly moved to the door. She swiped the badge through the sensor. The door beeped and slid open. The security guards didn't flinch. They didn't look at her. The door closed softly behind her. Inside the next room was an entirely different atmosphere. The floor was lined with rows of servers, each one humming with power, flashing lights and numbers running across screens. But it wasn't the servers that caught Eliza's attention. It was the large screen mounted at the far end of the room, displaying a digital map of multiple dimensions. Eliza's eyes widened. There were lines connecting each world, networks, almost like a web stretching out in every direction. There was data here, tons of it. The entire map of alternate realities, right in front of her. She began to approach the screen when the faintest noise caught her attention. A soft click. She turned just in time to see a figure step out of the shadows. It was a man, tall and lean, wearing a dark suit. He had a hard, calculating look in his eyes, and there was something about his presence that made Eliza freeze in place. Looking for something? The man asked, his voice cold but amused. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. She'd been caught, but it wasn't just any agent who had found her. It was Director Hawk, the head of the Dimensional Intelligence Agency. Eliza froze in place, her heart hammering in her chest. Director Hawk. The man who was supposed to be leading the entire operation, the one whose name she'd heard in passing, always spoken of in hushed, reverent tones by the agents around her. The reality of the situation hit her like a punch to the gut. She'd been caught. But it wasn't just any agent who had found her, it was the one person she didn't expect to run into. The head of the entire agency. The one who knew everything. And she had just waltzed into his headquarters without realizing it. Hawk didn't look surprised. His face, cold and impassive, betrayed no hint of emotion. The only thing that gave him away was the faint glint of amusement in his eyes, like he was watching a chess game unfold and was just waiting for his opponent to make the next move. Well, he said, stepping further into the room, his voice smooth, it seems we have a bit of a problem, don't we? Eliza tried to stay calm, though her pulse was racing. Her mind was scrambling for a way out. She had no idea how much he knew, or if he was playing some kind of game. But there was one thing she was sure of: if Hawk had caught her, he knew exactly what she had been up to. I didn't mean to intrude, she said, forcing a nonchalance into her voice she didn't feel. Just admiring your digital map of the multiverse. Very impressive. Very advanced. She gestured vaguely toward the glowing screen behind her, trying to act like she belonged. Hawk's lips quirked upward, just slightly. Don't be coy, Agent Gray. I'm well aware of what you've been doing. He moved closer, his steps deliberate, and Eliza couldn't help but feel a cold shiver race up her spine. You've been poking around places you shouldn't be. But I have to admit, I'm impressed. It's not often we see an agent with the guts to go off script. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a threat. She was too nervous to care. I wasn't doing anything wrong, Eliza stammered, her eyes darting to the door, her mind already calculating escape routes. But it was no use. Hawk was blocking her exit. I was just gathering intel. I'm on assignment, just like you told me. A soft chuckle escaped him. But you see, that's the problem, isn't it? You think you're still on assignment. You think you're still working for the agency. But the truth is, you've already outgrown your usefulness. The words hit her like a slap, and her breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about? Hawk leaned against the nearest console, folding his arms across his chest. You've been gathering data, yes. But not just for the agency. You've been gathering information for yourself. You've seen the pattern, haven't you? The way we manipulate worlds. The way we control them. The way we've been using you, all of you, to expand our reach. His words sank in slowly, and Eliza's stomach dropped. She had been so focused on the tasks at hand, on completing her missions and gathering the data, that she hadn't seen the larger picture. But now that Hawk had said it aloud, it felt painfully obvious. She had been a pawn. The DIA wasn't just interested in collecting tech, they were trying to control entire worlds, force them into submission. She wasn't here to protect her dimension, she was here to help the agency conquer others. "You're right," she said, her voice shaking slightly but growing stronger. "I've seen enough. And I'm not going to help you anymore." Hawk's eyes darkened, and the smile slipped from his face. "Oh, I don't think you have a choice in the matter." He stepped forward, his gaze locking onto hers. "You're not getting out of here, Agent Gray. Not unless I say so." A chill ran down her spine. Her hand instinctively reached for the dimensional key in her pocket, but Hawk was too quick. He grabbed her wrist, his grip tight and unyielding. "Don't even think about it," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're in my world now. And there's nowhere to run." Her mind raced. She couldn't let him get the upper hand. She had to find a way out, and fast. She scanned the room, looking for any opportunity, any weakness she could exploit. Then, she spotted it, a small maintenance hatch near the floor, barely visible behind one of the server stacks. It was a long shot, but it was her only shot. With a swift, sudden movement, she jerked her wrist free from his grip, catching him off guard. Before he could react, she turned and sprinted for the hatch. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline surging through her as she dove for the small opening. She didn't care about the consequences anymore. She wasn't going to let Hawk trap her here. "Stop," he yelled behind her, but Eliza was already pulling open the hatch. The maintenance tunnel was cramped and dark, but she didn't hesitate. She crawled through the narrow passage as fast as she could, ignoring the sharp edges that scraped her skin. Behind her, she could hear Hawk's voice, his footsteps echoing in the chamber above. He was coming after her. He wouldn't let her get away that easily, but Eliza wasn't going to stop. She couldn't stop. The tunnel curved sharply, and Eliza stumbled over a set of pipes. She cursed under her breath but pressed on. She didn't know where the tunnel led, but she had to keep moving. She had to stay ahead of him. Her fingers brushed something cold and metallic. She looked down and saw another door, a plain, steel exit door, just like the one she had come through earlier. She yanked on the handle and burst into a small storage room, panting for breath. There were crates stacked against the walls, and a few dim overhead lights flickered above her. For a moment, she stood still, listening. The only sound was her own breathing, harsh and frantic in the stillness. Then, she heard it. The soft sound of footsteps, closer now. She had no time. No time to think, no time to plan. She had to get out of there. The dimensional key. She needed the dimensional key. With shaking hands, Eliza pulled it out of her pocket and pressed the button on its surface. She held her breath, hoping, praying, that it would work. The air around her seemed to shimmer, the walls blurring for a moment. Then, with a soft whoosh, the portal opened. Eliza didn't hesitate. She dove through the swirling vortex, the world around her warping, twisting, and reforming as she passed through it. For a brief moment, she felt like she was being torn apart and stitched back together. The sensation was dizzying, but she fought to keep her focus, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the world snapped back into place. She stumbled out of the portal and landed hard on her knees. She gasped for air, feeling the weight of the escape catch up to her. She was shaking, drenched in sweat, but she had made it. She had escaped. The world she found herself in was strange, but it didn't matter. She didn't care where she was, so long as she was free, for now, anyway. But she knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. Hawk would find her. The DIA would find her. And when they did, they would come for her with everything they had. But Eliza Gray wasn't done yet, not by a long shot.